So hey everybody, welcome back to Northwest Small Batch Brewing. My name is Steven, and I'm glad you're here. Hoping you're having a great day. Today, a little brew talk about boiling your wort, or not boiling your wort, or partially boiling your wort. I don't know, but we'll get into that. Before we get started, it would help me out a lot if you look down and hit the like, thumbs up button, and subscribe while you're there. Really helps my channel when you're searching for it come up in the YouTube search algorithms. So it really helps my channel out if you could do that. All right, so to boil or to not boil is the question. I kind of did a little bit of research and took some notes here because there's a couple, well, there's one thing in particular that I wanted to really try to get some good research on because, man, there's some ambiguity. And what I found is there is not actually a clear answer that I could find. So here's the deal. Do you have to boil your wort or not? You will see a lot of stuff on homebrewing forums and whatnot where, boy, there's a lot of misinformation. For one thing, it's very common in the brewing world that people hold on to really old ideas, like the way we used to brew a century ago or centuries ago or whatever, you know. And just, I don't know if nobody ever bothered to try it a different way. They just figured, well, it's working, we'll just do it this way. Nobody ever thought maybe we could try and see if it's a better way, or maybe science has been able to determine why we do it a certain way. There are a lot of people out there that are really locked in to ideas that are actually not rooted in science or, you know, reality. So this is one of those videos where I'm trying to help explain why we do or don't do something, because you're going to come across this in homebrewing forums. All right, first of all, do you have to boil your wort? The short answer is no, right? We know that forever there's been things called farmhouse ales that are no boil, they're called raw ales basically, where you just don't boil it at all. So let's talk a little bit, let's back up a little bit from there. So I mean, that's the short answer is no, you don't have to boil your wort. I mean, you never have to do anything, right? But you're taking a risk if you don't boil it, because part of the reason you're boiling your wort, and this will be reason number one to boil, is to sterilize it, right? You're basically wiping any chance of any bacteria or any wild yeast. You really just want the yeast that you're pitching to be the one that takes over that fermentation. And there's yeast all around us on everything. So that's why we spray with star sand to sanitize stuff, and we boil our wort. So the question is, do you have to boil your wort to sanitize it, or you know, kill all the bacteria and wild yeast, or not? Well, the reality is you don't have to boil your water, or in this case your wort, to a boil. You don't have to heat it all the way to a boil in order to sterilize, or you know, basically sterilize it for fermenting. You can do pasteurizing. So if you bring your wort up to at least 170 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'll retroactively stick in the centigrade in the chat here, or in the window. So 170 degrees Fahrenheit, it will pasteurize. So rather than boil it, you could just bring it up to 170 degrees, hold it there for like, I don't know, here it varies on how long you should hold it. Some people say 15 minutes, some people say 10 minutes, maybe longer. I guess you just have to decide what you feel comfortable with, but long enough that you think it's sterile, and then you're good to go, right? So that's one of the reasons that we do this, is to ensure that you don't get anything other than what you want growing in your fermentation. What's another reason we boil wort? Hops, right? So wort by itself is very sweet. If you've ever made a super malty beer, it can be, you'd think, oh, sweet, that's fine, no problem. But if you've ever tried it, it actually doesn't taste that great. You don't realize. You should try it as an experiment sometime if you're a home brewer. Try making a beer with no hops at all and see how it tastes. And you'll realize that you really do need the bitterness from the hops to offset or balance that sweetness from the malt. And of course, we add hops, like towards the end to add, oh, my words are escaping me today. The smell of the beer when you're smelling it and the flavor, at the end. Sometimes you have hops that are specifically designed for that. So you don't really need, for the smell and the taste, you don't really need to boil those. In fact, a lot of people claim that as soon as you put those hops in, it's almost impossible to capture just the scent or the flavor of those hops right at the end. It's so quick. Same thing with bitterness. People will tell you, like in forums, that you have to boil the hops for an hour to get the right bitterness from them. It's just not true. It's not true. It's definitely not true. Hops actually release, they provide bitterness much faster than you would think. So you definitely don't need an hour boil in order to get the bitterness you want. And if for some reason you perceive that you haven't gotten the bitterness that you want, you could always add more hops to compensate, or you could add a different hop with a higher alpha acid that has more bitterness. So I mean, you could go that route and not have to boil as long or at all. So that's the other reason we would sometimes boil. So you've got sterilizing, right, to have a clean palate to work with at the end. And we said instead of boiling it, you could just pasteurize it, and that would do the same thing. Hops. Well, I've just talked about hops, and I've said how they really do release their flavor and bitterness much more quickly than a lot of people want to admit. There's two more reasons. One of them is a pretty simple fix, and that is boil off. So we also boil our wort because we want to reduce it down to a specific volume. So we do an hour, we kind of calculate an hour boil so that at the end, hopefully you're going to be right around, like if you're doing a 5-gallon batch, you'd want like 5.5, right? Usually, that's like what we go for. And so you do the boil to get it down to that. So the way around that is you just, you learn your system, right? You learn your brewing system and you dial it in until you get to the point where you have pretty much the right amount of water every time so that you end up not having to really make a very big adjustment at the end. You may be a small adjustment, but nothing consequential. So the answer to the boil off at the end is just better calculations on water so that you're hitting the right amount of water at the end without having to boil. The last reason, number 4, for boiling your wort, removing DMS. This is the probably most controversial of all the topics of boiling wort, DMS. So what is DMS? Well, DMS is an off flavor that can give your beer like a corn sort of taste. And in fact, there's people that claim that you shouldn't even call it an off flavor because there are certain beers that actually specifically have that flavor, and so it's actually supposed to be there. So it's not so much an off flavor as just a flavor, and you may or may not want to have it in your beer. Most beers, you don't want it. So there'll be a lot of people that will go and say, well, you have to boil your wort to get rid of the DMS, dimethyl sulfide, if you're wondering. That's the whole thing. Here's the deal. Your wort doesn't have any DMS in it. So if you do the research and you figure out where does it come from, well, it starts with the grain. And when the grain is malted, it sprouts. It's a little, what do you call it? A little sprout in it. Anyway, this is when a certain chemical is going to be created in that grain. I'm not going to try to say the name of the chemical. I'll get it wrong. Just trust me, there's a chemical that's created. That chemical isn't so much of a problem at all in our brewing. The problem is when that chemical is heated, it breaks down or whatever, and it converts into DMS, this dimethyl sulfide, which is what gives us those, corn flavors. So, if you never heat up your wort, you won't ever get any DMS flavor because it won't ever create it because you're not breaking down that chemical. So it is not boiling that creates DMS. It's actually, well, let me restate that. It's so hard to explain, but the point is DMS is not in your wort until you heat it up. That comes to the part that's super ambiguity, and I couldn't find an actual scientifically, stated answer to this. So we know that DMS has a different boiling point than water. I found different sources saying it was between 100 and 110 degrees Fahrenheit. And again, I'll put the Celsius in. Which means that it boils off way before your wort actually comes to a boil. So here's my problem with that. If that's true, and you heat up your wort to 170 to pasteurize it, would that not still create DMS? Well, again, it gets questionable because actually I found even more information stating that even though DMS starts to boil, or the boiling point is supposedly between 100 and 110, it doesn't become what they call volatile until 165. And that, again, was a range, so I guess my point is, so if you take all that information, I think that the best option is if you're trying to just pasteurize, do it quickly. And, I would say heat it up to 170 degrees for 5 minutes and then shut it down and cool it as quickly as you can. By the way, that is the reason. Here's the thing. That's one of the main reasons why you'll read about them saying you should always cool down your wort as quickly as possible using an ice bath or a wort chiller, because you want to because the longer supposedly that wort stays at a hot temperature, it's going to continue to produce DMS. Baloney. Here's the thing. Okay. You've been boiling the wort for an hour, and it's been releasing DMS that whole time. Does it release all of it? No. From what I understand, it doesn't. However, it's been releasing all that DMS and the steam. That's the whole point of boiling it. It's just if you're going to heat it up, if you boil it, it gets rid of that DMS. There are plenty of people, including myself, that have done no-chill beers, where you just finish the boil. The way I did it is I would just let it cool down to 170. I'd stick a lid on it, and then continue to let it cool down until I could put an airlock without it sucking, or whatever, and just let it cool overnight. And so heat was trapped in it all night long, and my beers tasted fine. There was no off flavors. So I don't think there's a lot of validity, and I've done a lot of beers that way. So I don't think there's a lot of validity in saying that that you have to cool down your wort super fast. I think maybe there's some fairness to say you want to cool it down quickly so that it doesn't get so it doesn't have a chance of getting bacteria and wild yeast in it. But if you cover it and seal it, it's not likely to happen in that short of a period of time, like overnight. Anyway, and then you've of course got the Aussie style of beer making where they put it in a plastic food grade cube and kind of push all the air out and seal it, and then they just leave it in the cube until they want to use it, right? So anyway, a lot of understanding and not doing much research on that. So Like when I do my, I don't do it very often, but every now and then when I do an extract beer, I just basically add, make up the extract and water mix, and I heat it up to 170. I throw the hops in, leave them in for 30 minutes at 170, and I just cool it down, remove the hops, and put it in the fermenter. That's it. So, and I don't really have an issue with DMS. So I think, and also what I've read is that DMS is not that big an issue really for home brewers. It's not that common to be a problem for home brewers. So to boil or not to boil, I would say if you're going to boil, just do the hour boil, like that we've always been doing. We know it does. We know it seems to work great, and that's the standard. If you want to reduce it to 30 minutes, I don't see why that would be a problem. I think that you can get plenty of bitterness and everything out of your hops by just doing a 30-minute boil. So if you want to cut it down, just remember that that you're not going to boil off as much wort when you do that, and so you have to consider that when you're putting in your initial water volumes. If you don't want to boil at all, you want to do a raw ale. It's a little more complicated, especially if you don't. Well, I mean, you're going to have to pasteurize it, in my opinion. Like, I made a raw ale once. I'll admit it didn't turn out so great. I mean, it turned out, but it just wasn't that great. But basically, I brought it up to 170 degrees to pasteurize it for like 5 minutes, and then I just cooled it back down. And I made a hop tea out of the hops the night before. And then I poured that into the raw ale to give the bitterness from the hops. Anyway, or you could just dry hop, I guess, Anyway, that's basically what I had to say about boiling and not boiling. A lot more questions maybe than answers, but we know that you can get away with a 30-minute boil. People do it all the time. We know with extract brews, people all the time skip the boil. Look up Dr. Hans. He's a brewer in Sweden. He has a homebrew channel, and he has, I think he runs a homebrew store. And he doesn't like to do all-grain brewing during the winter because it's very cold in Sweden, and he can't go outside in the snow. And so he is currently doing this series of beers that he calls the Shake and Brew, where he takes a mini keg, and he puts dry malt extract in it, and then he puts a small amount of boiling water in it, and then he puts the hops in it, closes it up and shakes it for like 5 minutes to get all the malt extract to mix up and everything. Then he opens it and he fills it the rest of the way with just room temperature water, which obviously brings the temperature back down to a temperature that's low enough to pitch yeast. Then he just pitches his yeast, he puts an airlock or whatever on it, and lets it ferment. No boiling at all. And he's done a whole bunch of these. And so it's proof that you don't have to boil it. You don't have to. So my suggestion is, you're a home brewer, you have the ability to experiment and try different things and see what works for you and what doesn't work for you, and see what happens when you do certain things. And so just try it, see what happens. Do it on a small scale so you're not wasting a lot of money if it doesn't turn out very good. Yeah, I mean, I've got a couple of experiments back here in my freezer that I'll be posting, at some point. And so they're 1 gallon batches because I don't want to waste a lot of beer if they don't turn out very good. So there you go. There you have it. That's all for this video. Thanks for stopping by. I appreciate it. And happy brewing. And I will see you in a week. Have a good one.